eres mía, si yo soy tuyo, ¿cómo de que no? Luego aquel beso que tú me diste, aquella noche, mi amor, lo que juraste cuando dijiste, te entrego mi corazón, ¿cómo de que no? No fueron ciertos tus juramentos, fueron mentiras, ¿verdad? ¿Cómo de que no? ¿Cómo de que no? ¿Cómo de que no? ¿Cómo de que no? Si tú eres mía, si yo soy tuyo, ¿cómo de que no? Aquella noche, mi amor, lo que juraste cuando dijiste, te entrego mi corazón, ¿cómo de que no? No fueron ciertos tus juramentos, fueron mentiras, ¿verdad? ¿Cómo de que no? ¿Cómo de que no? Si tú eres mía, si yo soy tuyo, ¿cómo de que no? Muchas gracias.
Y ahora para todos ustedes, disfruten la melodía de Nefris. Para todos ustedes.
¡Lindo! Menea la cintura, cintura, cintura. El día que te encuentre, el día que te encuentre, bailando otra vez. Ay, el día que te encuentre, bailando otra vez. Hay que delante la gente, vamos a hablar inglés. Hay que delante la gente, vamos a hablar inglés. Vamos a hablar inglés, vamos a hablar inglés. Tú me respetas, te saco un bien. Tú me respetas, te saco un bien. Es celosa. Cuando yo te agarre, fue cuando yo te agarre, dándole café. Cuando yo te agarre, dándole café. Hay que a la vecinita, vamos a hablar inglés. Hay que a la vecinita, vamos a hablar inglés. Vamos a hablar inglés, vamos a hablar inglés. Tú me respetas, te saco un bien. Tú me respetas, te saco un bien. ¡Ay! ¡Hueva! ¡Ay, hombre! ¡Ay, hombre! ¡Sabor! ¡Lindo! Respeta los rangos. ¡Toma! Si tú vas con ella, que si tú vas con ella, no te la dio usted. Que si tú vas con ella, no te la dio usted. Que si le pendiente, vamos a hablar inglés. Que si le pendiente, vamos a hablar inglés. Y vamos a hablar inglés, vamos a hablar inglés. Tú me respetas, te saco un bien. Tú me respetas, te saco un bien. Uy, lindo. Vamos a hablar inglés. vaina. Estoy celosa, yo me soy celosa, ¿cómo te has creído? Y que yo sí soy celosa, y yo no te he creído. Yo tengo el defecto, cuidar lo mío, en que yo tengo el defecto, cuidar lo mío, y vamos a hablar inglés, vamos a hablar inglés. Tú me respetas, o te saco un pie, tú me respetas, o te saco un pie. Ay, respétame, papi, señor. ¿Sabes de lo que es? Ay, ay, hombre. Ay, hombre. Gózatelo. Báilatelo.
Hi, everyone, and welcome. So happy to have you with us this evening. I want to give a big shout out and thank you to Hartford's own 𝘍𝘂𝗪𝙗 for opening up this evening and getting such a nice, energetic start to our program this evening. Hartford Public Library's 2021 National Endowment for the Arts Big Read celebrates Julia Alvarez's books In the Time of the Butterflies and the youth selection, How 𝚬𝚪𝘮 Came to Visit, Stay, through exciting programming around Dominican art, literature, and performance, as well as educational programs on revolutionary Hartford Latinas. And it's been going on and will continue throughout the month of March. Julia Alvarez's In the Time of the Butterflies is a work of historical fiction, and it's based on the lives of the four Mirabal sisters who participated in underground efforts to topple Trujillo's 3-decade-long dictatorial regime in the Dominican Republic. The youth selection, How 𝚬𝚪𝘮 Came to Visit, or Stay, is about 𝚬𝚪𝚮, Miguel's quirky, charismatic, and maybe magical aunt, who moves in with his family in Vermont when she arrives from the Dominican Republic to help out his mommy. Julia Alvarez paid a visit to Hartford Public School students this past Tuesday as 𝚬𝚪𝚮 herself. We have free English and Spanish language copies of both Big Read books, and they're available through contact-free pickup and will continue to be available. And they're available at all of our locations that are doing contact-free pickup. I also want to thank all the artists, the community leaders, and of course my HPL colleagues who dreamed up and have created this amazing Big Read. And it's virtual, but it's as good or better than ever. And I want to thank the National Endowment for the Arts for their generous support again this year. The NEA Big Read is an initiative of the National Endowment for the Arts in partnership with Arts Midwest. For tonight, there's a live Spanish interpretation available on Zoom. And if you haven't found it already, look down at the bottom of your screen. There should be a button down there that says interpretation, and you can select Spanish to have this live streamed in Spanish language. And now it is my pleasure to introduce our very special guests. Julia Alvarez was born in New York City, and her parents returned to their native country, the Dominican Republic, shortly after her birth. 10 years later, the family was forced to flee to the United States because of her father's involvement in a plot to overthrow the dictator Trujillo. Alvarez has written novels, collections of poems, nonfiction, and numerous books for young readers, including the 𝚬𝚪𝚮 series. Alvarez's awards are many, many, and include the 𝘍𝘂𝗪𝙑 and Americas Awards. And 𝘍𝘂𝗪𝙑, by the way, is a librarian. A great story about her, too, so you might want to check that out. And she received those awards for her books about her books for young readers. She's also received the Hispanic Heritage Award and the F. Scott Fitzgerald Award. And in 2013, she received the National Medal of Arts from President Obama. Julia will be sharing a brief presentation with us about In the Time of the Butterflies this evening. And then afterwards, she'll be joined in conversation by Connecticut writer Sarahí Almonte Caraballo. Sarahí is a Dominican, Puerto Rican poet, writer, performer, and nurse raised in New York City who's been writing since the age of 15. She's a storyteller, not afraid to be vulnerable on the page. She makes connections between her memories and the lessons she has taken from them. Sarahí is an alumna of Voices of Our Nation's Arts, VONA 2020, Writing Our Lives, and Sankofa Sisterhood Writers Retreat. She's performed her works at various community events in colleges and universities, including Brown University, UConn, Rutgers, and Trinity. Currently, she's working on her memoir in prose, Louder Than Love. Currently living in Connecticut when she's not writing, Sarahí is a public health nurse, thank you so much, who builds community trust one patient at a time. She's also a very tired mother of twin toddlers, I can't even imagine, known for making amazing forts out of bed sheets and sofa cushions. So with that, please help me join our very, very special guests in conversation this evening. And Julia, the stage is yours.
Hello, I hope you can hear me. I just want to, before starting my presentation, thank everybody at the Hartford Public Library, Bridget Quinn, the people at the National Endowment for the Arts, the Big Read, wonderful program. And I want to say a special thank you to 𝘍𝘁𝙗𝙆𝙀 band and 𝘏𝘂𝙀, because I needed that musiquita. We don't get much of that in Vermont. So thank you so much. It really made me get up and start moving my waist and my hips. I haven't done that in a while. So thank you so much. And a special thank you to Sarahí Almonte for being my compañera tonight. And I had no idea that you're an essential worker as far as I'm concerned, if you're a writer and a storyteller, but that you're also a nurse. You guys have been amazing this year. We are all indebted to you. So anyhow, we will get started. I'm going to share my screen, but host disabled attendee screen sharing. So I do need permission from.
You should be good now, Julia.
Okay, great. I love that sound of it should be good now. Okay, share. And I will open it. Forgive me, we're all kind of new to all this technology, or some of us are. I hope it's now before you. The title of the PowerPoint on In the Time of the Butterflies, which is also available in Spanish, and El Tiempo de las Mariposas. So thank you for those of you that read it in English. Maybe some of you read it in Spanish. So I'm going to talk a little bit about writing the book and a little bit about me as a writer. I started my life in Nueva York. This is the only picture that exists of that time, newborn Julia with mommy. And when I was 1 month old, my parents were too homesick and wanted to go back to La Familia, so they went back. Papi was not so sure because the dictatorship was still going on, but there was a promise of free elections. Papi didn't quite believe it, but he went back. They were all so homesick. Back then, 1950, there weren't that many Dominicans at all in the United States. Most of them couldn't leave the dictatorship. So we did go back. You see a picture of part of the extended familia. What was it like? People ask, growing up there. It was an amazing, rich experience. Papi, my father, was the youngest of 25 children. The first wife had 10, and then she passed away, and he married another woman who's my grandmother, and she had 15 kids, and my father was the youngest of them. So I had tíos and tías and cousins all over the place. So it really was not just an extended familia, it was like a little village. So when people say, oh, you grew up in a dictatorship, because I was buffered by all this love and all this familia, I never experienced, because they kept the scary parts away from us children. So when I describe my childhood, I show this little picture. The only time I was blonde and pudgy, and that's me in the DR. And the way I describe my childhood is there was always a hand to hold. You reached up, and there was a tía, abuela, madrina, prima to hold your hand. And they also were there to tell stories, which was really important because I grew up in a storytelling culture. So one of the few books that I did read, because nobody read books. My grandmother didn't go past 4th grade. Los libros, we have one auntie who read, and people said she was going to be a jamona because she was always having her nose in a book. And that tía gave me the only book I remember reading until we came to this country when I was 10. And it was The Arabian Nights. Oh my goodness. I love this book. It was about a girl that told stories, and she saved herself from being killed by the cruel sultan, because every night for 1,001 nights, she told him a story. And he fell in love with her stories, fell in love with her. And Scheherazade, that was the girl's name, ended up saving her life and the lives of all the women in the kingdom that the sultan was killing off, because she had changed his heart with the power of her storytelling. And I thought, whoa, I want to be someone like that. I didn't know how you did that, but it seemed to me like it was amazing that stories have that kind of power. But as I mentioned, it was a dictatorship. El Jefe was in control of the country, a 31-year bloody dictatorship. There were parades. There was all this homage to him. And I didn't know any better. I just thought El Jefe was a very special, powerful guy. I didn't know that he was like the cruel sultan. But maybe my auntie gave me that book so that she would put a little thing in my imagination about how you fight dictatorships, one of the ways to fight them. So because my father got involved in the underground that was started by these 3 beautiful young women, Minerva with a guitar, Maria Teresa with a braid, Patria in the bottom, and Rufino de la Cruz, who was not part of the underground, but was the man that agreed to drive them the day that they were killed. So he lost his life too. But when we were there, these women started an underground, and my papi was part of it, as were all these uncles. 2 of them ended up being killed by the dictators, or the one on the right, 𝘃𝘃𝗵, committed suicide when the secret police came to his door to get him. 𝘃𝘃 in the middle, 𝘃𝘵𝚵, who did survive after 9 years in La Victoria. So I knew a lot of stories later in my life from talking to 𝘃𝘵𝚵 and talking to people about 𝘃𝘃 and 𝘃𝘃𝗵. After my parents died, a relative sent me this picture, and that's my papi with the boots and the camouflage. And this was when they would go up to the mountains to rehearse their plots to ambush the dictator and assassinate him. And they would go up to have these mock rehearsals in the mountains. So papi, I had never seen anything like this. The reason they have all these guineas is because nobody was allowed to own, guns, but they could have hunting rifles. So everybody in the underground became a hunter, and they would go up supposedly to hunt guineas. So they'd have to hunt some guineas to bring back to be their cover. But that's papi. So I was really touched to get this picture. Next picture is we had to leave because papi's involvement was discovered, and we had to leave in a hurry overnight. And so this is Julia's passport picture as a 10-year-old. And we came to the United States. There's Lady Liberty. And mommy and papi had said to us on the plane that we were going finally to the land of the free, the home of the brave, where there was this great democracy that was going to be so different from what we were escaping. Well, I didn't find that this was true. It was the 60s. The civil rights movement was just getting started. Signs like the one, "We serve whites only, no Spanish or Mexicans," they were still part of the culture out there, still part of the culture now, but underground in many ways. There was the Ku Klux Klan. And the way that I felt was that what they had said we were coming to wasn't out there. But I believed so much in Lady Liberty that I thought she must be so ashamed that the people in this country are not living up to the ideals of why it was founded. So in New York, I was very lonely. We had no relatives. That buffer of familia was gone. We didn't find it a very welcoming place. The bullies in the playground called us names. I didn't even understand half of them. So I was homesick and wanted to go back to the Dominican Republic. Not even 4 months, we came in August, 4 months after the Mirabal sisters were killed. In the Dominican Republic, it was reported as a car accident. There's the article from 𝘍𝘃𝗵, and what I did was I translated it into English. But in Time magazine, December 12th, 1960, it was reported that supposedly this was a car accident, but it did not look like a car accident. So when Papi saw that in Time magazine, he was so, glad, because people would realize that this dictatorship, how cruel it was. So this was soon after we had left. So I'm one of 4 sisters. And here were the 3 Mirabal sisters, Minerva, Patria, Maria Teresa. And I always thought of them as the sisters who didn't make it and gave us the opportunity, therefore, to be free. So I always felt them. People say, when did you start writing this book? I always felt their story inside my skin. I felt like I owed them something. I didn't know what it was. And so when I started to think about writing, and I wrote first a novel based on the experiences of my sisters and myself called How the Garcia Girls Lost Their Accents. But then I thought I owe them to tell their story. But I only thought there had been 3. I didn't even know there were 4. And on one trip to do research in the Dominican Republic, my aunt, Tia Rosa, said, "Wow, don't you want to meet 𝘍𝘍?" And I said, "Who is 𝘍𝘍?" "The sister that survived." I said, "The sister that survived? There were 4 sisters already." I felt the hairs on my arms raised. 4 sisters. Yes, and 𝘍𝘍 survived, and she will tell you the story. Now, 𝘍𝘍, it turned out, was the second of the 4 sisters, and I'm the second of our 4 sisters. And I thought, if this isn't a green light from the powers that be, I don't know what is. So that's when I started, as I called it, chasing the butterflies. Over time, I wrote the book, 1984. It was published. And over time, I've seen their little story, that it was mostly 𝘍𝘍 telling it from her home, become an amazing national story. Because, of course, the story of the Mirabal spread is part of what brought the dictatorship down, because people were so outraged by what had happened. They became national heroines. These are the 4 obelisks, the 4 sides of the obelisk, in their honor in La Capital, now in the capital, Santo Domingo of the country. They're even on the 200 peso bill. So they became national heroines, schools, streets, festivities around the time of their killing, November 25th. There's always celebrations, commemorations. But then what happened is the story spread. The story spread. The butterflies spread their wings. In 1999, the United Nations declared November 25th International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women in honor of the Mirabar sisters. It's an amazing thing that from a little country, these women that sacrificed their lives became international symbols. And every November 25th, I get all these pictures from all around the world, people telling me, oh, look at what we did, what was happening today in this was in India on November 25th in honor of International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women. This one in Afghanistan. This one in Romania with the names of women that have lost their lives during the year to the violence against them. This one in Spain, November 25th. This one in Thailand, girls marching. This one in Peru. And amazing things happen with the story. I learned that from Scheherazade in the Arabian Nights, but I didn't think that the story that I told would inspire people to find their own mariposas. And an American woman named Tricia Thorndike de Surier, she married un Dominicano, ended up starting an organization. When she read the novel, she was so moved and she felt that she wanted to do a project that would empower young girls in the Dominican Republic. So she started the Mariposa DR Foundation, and their logo is, I am the world's most powerful force for change. And they're girls from 8 to 18, and they attend the Mariposa DR Center. They get an education. They go on to college, they get professions. And these are girls that when they show up the first day, many aren't even wearing shoes. They live in dirt houses. There's a cycle of generational poverty in their families, and they are becoming launched as mariposas. They're finding their wings. They're getting an education. So it's amazing that, one little story inspires one person. That story goes on to inspire someone else and someone else. And this is when stories really are alive and working. And that is what a storyteller does, what we dream of doing at our hearts, not the awards, not money. I think a true storyteller just wants the story to enter and liberate someone else. Toni Morrison said that the function of freedom is to free someone else. And Julia Alvarez adds, she can't think of a better way to do that than to put a book in somebody's hands and make them into a reader, a storyteller, a story receiver. So one last slide. This is another amazing moment that really, I just was thrilled. Bill, my husband, and I started a project in the mountains, kind of like the Mariposa Foundation, but for this whole community, a literacy project and a co-op farm. We found that most of especially the adults in the community, did not know how to read or write. So we started a literacy program for adults and one for mothers, young mothers. The first full book that they read was En el tiempo de las mariposas in Spanish. And the reward for their achievement was we hired a van and took them down to meet Dede Mirabal. This was the highlight, meeting Doña Dede. As you can see, one of them even brought her kid, and they were amazed to not just read a story, but to hear it from someone who had lived the story. So this is the last slide. For me, writing and activism are always together, because my first muse was a storyteller that managed to save her life and the life of women in her kingdom by telling stories. So for me, those two things are very bound together. And on the left, since we have so much Dominican talent tonight, this is an artist who now lives in Brooklyn, Gaby D'Alessandro, and she is Dominican. And she did this amazing illustration. And I feel like that's part of what happened to me with the book, to me hearing the story that more and more butterflies have been released. So thank you for listening, and I guess we're going to go back to the to the full screen. I think that's working.
All right.
Okay. Oh, it's worked. Thank you.
Yeah, it's working.
It's working.
It's your favorite words. It's working.
It's working. Yeah.
Julia, what an honor and a privilege to have this time with you. I've been joking around with everyone and saying, tengo lo nervio nervioso, voy a ver a tía Julia hoy. And it's, you know, literally imposter syndrome creeps up really quickly when you ask yourself, am I worthy to have a conversation with, right? So we have to—
You are a nurse, honey. You are the most essential person. No, and a storyteller too.
Yes, yes. I thank you for that presentation. It opens perfectly for me to my first question today with you, which is, you know, you were mentioning, or you mentioned that you know, we are set to sort of inspire others, and for you, or for us, you as a writer have become the sort of literary matriarch. You're there with Cherry Moraga and Sandra Cisneros and Gloria Sandua, and for those of us in our 40s now, you came into our lives during our late teenage years, early adult years. And when I found your book on the shelf, it opened an entire new world for me. I've been trying to find myself in a book for years. And I just want you to breathe that in to the idea that you literally have paved the way for writers and readers alike. I'm wondering, what does it feel like to sit with that notion? You know, you literally, you pivoted American literature to take the lens and say, here's another group that we need to hear the story from.
I thank you for those words. I'm very touched, and as for how I feel, first of all, very humble, because to get any credit for being able to do in your life what you feel like you were put on this earth to do, not everybody gets that opportunity. That is a privilege, an opportunity. And like Toni Morrison said, the function of freedom, of getting that opportunity, is to pass it on. So when someone like you or a reader says that it's been passed on, I feel like, oh, you know, yes, I paid a little bit of the huge debt that I owe. And the other thing is, you know, when we were starting out, there was no such thing as multicultural literature. There was no such thing. African-American literature wasn't even, you know, taught in the regular curriculum. I mean, it was just, it wasn't out there. And so I think part of the thing that Sandra, myself, Cherry, Gloria Saldúa were doing is that we were trying to find ourselves, and the books that were missing are the ones that we set out to write, not even with a high-minded notion of doing it for posterity, but just to fill up the vacuum and erasure that is so dangerous when you see it out there and you take it in, and you take it in. And as for being, you know, now around, you know, the abuela and the tías always say, más sabe el diablo por viejo que por diablo. It's because I'm now the viejita. So we get to be the viejos, and and it's so wonderful though that there are people like you, wonderful, talented, young Latinx writers and writers of color in Dominicana, Americanas, and all kinds of mixtures that are coming up. And, you know, it's still tough, as you know, still tough getting representation, but maybe the camino's a little wider and you guys are going to make it even wider. As soon as just going to be the whole globe is included. That's the hope.
Yes, absolutely. A lot of your books discuss the history of our culture and the constant sort of managing of or navigating this sort of male dominant society, whether it's in writing or whether it's in our countries. As we celebrate I think it's the 26th year of In Time of Butterflies, for me, one of the biggest messages that even in death, our voice can still speak. And while the death of the Mirabar sisters shook the nation, I think it also awakened the collective scream of like, estamos harto, right? And pointing once again to the importance of standing in our truth and voicing our truth. I'm gonna read a very early in the book in chapter 4, Patria's talking about how she went to the convent. And she says, at 14, I went away to Inmaculada Concepcion and all the country people around here thought I was entering the convent. What a pity, they said, such a pretty girl. That's when I started looking in the mirror. I was astonished to find not the child I had been, but a young lady with firm breasts and a sweet oval face. She smiled, dimpling prettily, but the dark, humid eyes were full of yearning. I put my hands up against the glass to remind her that she too must reach up for the things she didn't understand. When you wrote this, set out to write this book, what were you seeking to understand at that time? And 26 years later, have new understandings come from this book?
Bueno, that's an interesting, these are very good questions and make me think. It's hard to recreate. I think the impulse when I began this is what I talked about earlier, that I felt like my sisters and I had made it. We had made it, and they hadn't. And, later when I would read about survivor's guilt by people that survived the camps and had relatives die and felt this compulsion to sort of tell the story, to give testimony, to bear witness, because that's sometimes all you can do. You can't go back and save them. But you can pay it forward. So I think that I was haunted by them. And I read everything and interviewed everybody that I could. And I was una necia, asking questions and asking more and more. And what I was discovering is that there were books about the dictatorship, and they were all from the male point of view. What the men did, and here to find out that it actually was an underground movement started basically by Minerva Mirabal, and Manolo, her husband, Manolo Tavares, became the head of the underground because it was a political choice, because no one was going to take orders from a woman. Imagine that. So I said, no. What was it like to be a woman in the dictatorship? Especially because, as we all know, El Jefe was a predator. He exercised le droit de seigneur, which meant that el derecho del jefe, which is any woman he wanted, he could have. And if anybody resisted, they suffered. So I was really curious, what did it feel like to be in a female body? Not just be female in abstraction, but what was the dictatorship like for a female body that the pervasive understanding was that it was a rape culture. Mommy said her parents didn't let her go to fiestas. They didn't want her out and about, because if it got back, she was an attractive young woman. If it got out, maybe El Jefe would call her in for a visit. So that feeling of being under siege, that further level as female, that's something that I think very much I wanted to capture with the novel. And the struggle still goes on, the rape, the privileges, we look at these leaders and they're the ones in power, and all of a sudden out of the woodwork come 7 women, 8 women, it's rampant. And so we got to be vigilant, because that's the only way that we pay them for their sacrifice and the sacrifice of so many other women before them and since then.
Yeah, and on a daily basis as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. The first book I read of anyone who identified as Latino was Perry Thomas's Down These Mean Streets. That's also happened to be the first book I read in a day, in one sitting. And I think I couldn't put it down because the first book where I turned the pages and I literally knew exactly where the author was, right? He was describing Spanish Harlem. I was from Spanish Harlem. He talked about 3rd Avenue. He talked about St. Cecilia's Church. I knew exactly where he was. I didn't have to imagine another world. In books, and normally when we talk about children's books, young adult books, we emphasize how books take us to another place, sometimes an imaginary place, a place far and beyond. But we don't talk about the books that make us feel at home. Those books that they literally transport us to a specific time and a place. They sit us down at La Cocina de Tía Julia, or they bring us to Doña Juana's garden. Those stories that don't require that you get a passport. And while Perry Thomas's book was the first book for me that made me feel at home, your book, Something to Declare, was the book that made me feel safe at home. Because that book gave me permission to tell my story in this diasporic voice. I realized that I wasn't the only person who existed whose tongue split. And I had the ability to communicate these 3 worlds and tell the story of these 3 worlds from my perspective. I'm curious, what books have you read that make you feel home? And how does it influence your writing or your storytelling?
Well, that's such a good point, because I feel like I didn't read any books by people like me or about my world. If there was a Spanish person in a book, they would be mowing the lawn or serving people as a maid. I didn't see, not that there's anything wrong with those professions, but that was it. I didn't really see that. I remember the first iconic figure that I saw of a Latinx person on television, a Latina, was Chiquita Banana. And it was like, really? I just felt like it was such a stereotype. And the other thing that all my friends loved was I Love Lucy. And I hated Lucy. Every time the poor Desi opened his mouth and said something, he was the dummy. Everybody laughed. He had an accent. They made fun of the accent. And how people thought that was funny. I pretended sometimes with friends, but I felt really uncomfortable with that. So there was no reflection out there. What happened, which I think was a good thing, and it doesn't happen to all, it shut some people down, is because I was always having to read about other people that were not at all like me, it stretched the muscles of my imagination, which are also, I think of compassion as what happens, when you're writing, your imagination stretches. And those are the same muscles that I think are used for social justice, but it can also stunt you and make you hide from yourself, from the people around you. And I think that's the books that began to do that for me was the books of my compañeras. I mean, it was so wonderful to read Sandra, to read Gloria, to read even Piri Tomas, like you said, it was sort of like, I know that smell. So it wasn't just, I had to imagine it and reach for it. It integrated deeply all of me together. And that is such a blessing. You know, that's why we need multicultural literature first, to stretch the imagination muscles of mainstream, whatever that is, readers, because they have to become us. Because that's what you do when you read. You become the other. They have to become us. And that's great. But it's also because when you see yourself, it integrates your psyche. I mean, it just makes you feel affirmed and seen and real, you know. So yeah, finding those books were critical for me.
I was wondering if you were gonna mention Maxine's book, one of your favorites, where you the woman warrior. I found a little snippet where you start talking about what really sort of pulled you into that book. If you can share that with this particular audience, because it's fascinating to me how one line in a book can literally draw you in for the rest of it. So if you can just share a little bit of Maxine's book.
Yeah, I was mentioning Latinx writers, but of course, I call her the, you know, Sandra credits her. I've heard different writers of my generation talk about that book, The Woman Warrior, which when I opened it up, it was about a Chinese American family in Sacramento, California. But the minute I opened it up, it could have been Dominicans in Nueva York. It starts out with the first line of this memoir/novel is that where the Maxine says, my mother told me never ever to repeat the story. And then she goes on to tell the story. And I thought every Latina that I know could start out her novel, her memoir, by saying, Mami me dijo.
Que no dijera esto.
No. You don't go out and tell stories. You're not a blabbermouth. Don't repeat it. Be a nice girl. Keep it under tabs. And so Maxine Hong Kingston. And by the way, they're reissuing In the Time of the Butterflies, a celebratory edition. And guess who's writing the introduction? Maxine. Isn't that, I mean, it's just like, you know, it's up there.
Yeah.
Doña Bebé, meeting her, taking the group to meet her. It's really special.
That's great. I want to go back to, during your presentation, you talked about how you grew up, and you were born in the States, you went back to DR, and then, you know, the dictatorship and sort of brought you back here. And then after the dictatorship, you started going back and forth. There was sort of a going and a coming between the Dominican Republic and the States. I grew up in what I call the three Ps. Instead of the Bermuda Triangle, I call it the three Ps triangle, which is plátano, pana, and pavement.
What's the second one?
Plátano, pana, which is from Puerto Rico, panapeng, and pavement for New York City. And so, you know, I was born in Dominican Republic. I'm the daughter of a Puerto Rican mother and a Dominican father, bendición mami, papi. I grew up in New York City, and a good, huge portion of my childhood, I spent it between these three places, changing schools, languages, neighborhoods. I always say that I grew up in transit. In an interview you had in 2009, you were receiving the F. Scott Fitzgerald Literary Award, and you talked about us being bridge people. And for a long time, I felt as though I never fully belonged to any of these places that I was moving and transiting around, you know, back and forth from. And like you, I had to learn a new language, and I realized that I could do so much with it. So I turned to my journal. I just wrote a lot. For those of us who grew up in sort of the in-between, we're often orphaned from the country we leave and never really fully welcomed at the country we migrate to. Was there a time in your life where you had a similar experience? And can you tell us how this experience influences your writing and what you think our writing requires from us to continue to be bridge people?
Wow, that's a moving question too. Literally moving and moving. I really feel like what I said about coming to this country, that what I feel like I came to the United States looking, I found in the world of the imagination, not in a specific place. That here was my terra firma. Here in the world of story, everybody was welcome. You became the other became you. You shared connections. This is where I landed. This is my homeland, the world of story, because I think it's the world underneath all the worlds. I was just listening to a podcast this morning by a neuroscientist saying that we are the critter, human beings that make meaning. You know, bees make honey and silkworms make silk, and we tell stories. And this is how we become fully human, how we make our souls. So for me, that is the place that I inhabit. And the bridges are the more surface things. The stories allow us to do and connect, you know, like a little spider, weaving it together. But I think that for me, it's the world of story. And I think that those of us who are also, embodied in mixed hybridity selves, that we are key people right now in our human story, because we are the people that can connect different places and that then provide a connected global family. And if anything, this pandemic year has shown us is, you know, we're all in this together. We're going to make it together or we're not. I used to tell this to my students at Middlebury. You know, I was the faculty advisor of Alianza, the Latino student organization. You know, I would say, because they would say, oh my God, esto es tan difícil. This is like, you know, every day I have to be like explaining and you know, and I said, this is what we do. This is, you know, and sometimes they said that, you know, they would get the feeling that they didn't really get into the college, that they were led in because they were, you know, they were underprivileged and that they were being given this charity. I said, you're giving them their education. You are working hard. You are the bridge people. You know, we need us. And I really feel that, you know, I really feel that.
Yeah. Two things. I think I have time. We're running short on time. And so I have one more question I want to share with you or ask you. And then I want to share a piece with you if time allows. I was in conversation with a friend of mine and a writing mentor, a good friend of mine. Hi, Bonnie. And she pointed me to an essay collection from Edwidge Thantecott titled "Create Dangerously."
I see.
And she said that one of the questions she likes to ask writers is a quote from that essay that says, "All artists, writers among them, have several stories. One might call them creation myths that haunt and obsess them." What are your creation myths and what keeps you writing and coming back to the page?
Oh, wow. By the way, Edwidge is a dear friend, and that book is one of my favorites and I say that about every book of hers. So I'm maybe being una mentirosa, but it's true. It was an important book. What are the stories that haunt me? I think, you know, one of the things that I once heard one of my teachers that didn't write very much, but he said that a story, that many stories come to him addressed to resident at his address, but he doesn't write those down. It's the one that has his name on it that he knows is the one he has to write. So I think many times, you know, you get distracted and people say, oh, it would be great if you wrote about this or that. But the ones that I stay with are the ones that I feel like I'm discovering things. Mm-hmm. You know, they say that writers write because they know things. I write because I want to find things out. And if I already know the answer, I'm bored, and that gets communicated to my reader. So I think the stories that haunt me it's a mystery. And when they appear and when they obsess me and possess me, I know that that's the story, that it has deep roots, that goes down deep. And those are the ones that I feel compelled to tell. And each time it's different. I think I've always been interested in women and storytelling and their power. As I said, I grew up in a familia that the women weren't educated much. High school was considered enough education for a woman. And, you know, when I came and got to go to college, and then I went to a graduate program, and I was, you know, smarty pants. And when I was taking creative writing at my graduate program, I started to get it, that everything I was learning in that workshop, I had been taught already by men and women from my childhood. Some of them didn't even know how to read or write, but they knew about telling stories. They knew about refranes, how to gather things together into a little nugget of wisdom with a refran, how to time things, how to put in something funny. All of that had come from people who, you know, as Spike Lee once said, one of the greatest lessons of his life is that you can learn things from people who are dumber than you. They're not really dumber than you, but you think they are. And they're the ones sometimes that are the bedrock. So I think the stories that I would say really haunt me, possess me, often have to do with women and how they've survived, how they help each other survive. What, you know, I'm intrigued. I always say that when people say, well, who most inspires you? Who are your heroes? And I say, anonymous. And they go, what? I say, anonymous. All those women, all those unrecognized people that make things happen for other people, which, by the way, you in your profession, both a storyteller and nursing, you know, you allow and enable. And those figures, to me, are luminous, the anonymous, and to have the privilege and responsibility and sometimes the humility to tell those stories, to me is, you know, it's what drives me to keep writing. Yeah.
And we are thankful for those stories and thankful for everything that will keep you writing.
Well, let me hear what you were going to read.
So I hear your birthday is in 2 days.
Oh my God, ay Dios santo.
And so I am first and foremost always a poet. And so this is your birthday gift from me to you. And it's called The Bridge People.
Aye.
I have something to declare. I have an aunt who's a bridge builder. I've never met her. Well, I just met her. That's typical of our culture. Our families, whether by nature or nurture, expand fast. And before you know it, we have extensions of ourselves in places we've never imagined, like on a bookshelf, in the library, where I saw your name and it sounded like mine and it almost looked like mine, Álvarez, Almonte. I stared at the cover, Tia Julia gently smiling back at me like any other one of my tias would when I was telling them a story, as if to say, cuéntame. I found myself savoring each chapter of that book. I consumed each word like it was the first home-cooked meal I had after coming back from a hunger war. I was starving. You fed us permission to tell our stories, to elevate our voices, to write in Spanglish, to explore the pebble in our shoe as a step towards self-awareness, to declare, we are here. Nuestras voces liberadas hoy te piden la bendición. For being one of the aunts that set the literary canon lens towards those of us in the in-between. And while we may lose our accents along the way, we can't lose our history when it is written in books that hold our truths in bold ink. May we always know that we come from a place where different worlds converge, creating a new wholeness. We are an estuary between rivers and oceans. We have a palate for the sweet and salty, an eye for the clear and murky, an ear for the sound of silence. We bridge people, our connectors. We link the then and now, the here and there, the place in between, the place we call home. Thank you.
Que Dios te bendiga, mi hija. Que Dios te bendiga. Que Dios te bendiga y bendiga todo lo que tú cuentas y lo que haces. Thank you. That's another high point. Thank you. And I would love to get a copy of that. If you
got it.
To me, it's
Absolutely.
the best. It's the best.
Yes.
I'm so moved.
Thank you.
If I didn't have makeup on, I'd cry. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your time. Thank you to Hartford Public Library, the Big Reads program. It has been definitely an honor to have this conversation with you, to meet you along this path and have this opportunity. And I hope at some point there's a live version of this and I can actually get to meet you in person.
From your mouth to God's ears.
Yes.
Y que Dios te bendiga. No, verdaderamente, you've touched my heart. And to all the people at Hartford Public Library, what a treat. Thank you.
Thank you. We've had some amazing comments coming in through the chat. Folks are thanking you, recognizing the work. Some people I've noticed that said that your books literally saved their lives, that they have felt connected or somehow, some book along the way gave folks permission, how the Garcia girls lost their accents. That is a huge book for us. And it's just literally all these books that literally gave us permission to keep writing.
Thank you. Gracias.
Thank you.
Go enjoy your sancochos, your
Yes.
Thank you.
All right.
Señores. Bye-bye. Gracias.
Cuídate. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye.